I love Pakistan, but it's not doing well at all. I'm not saying anything that no one else knows. No state secrets here. And when you have bad governance, you have then bad policies. That really simply does not help. It doesn't matter where you do that. And that's all compounded with too much role of the military. We can talk about that later. Too much role of the military, too much corruption, not enough money put into things that count to develop a country. As in, most of the elections have been played around with. But this one is very bad. It's particularly bad because we are now very much in a social media era. Everyone knows it's been rigged. The rigging of this election is so much worse, apart from the economic problems that's going to compound it. In this era of social media, the establishment, whoever runs the show, I don't think will be able to get away with it. And this is not 1977. It's certainly not 1999. And I think they've bit way more than they can chew. The last thing the Americans would want to see, or anyone else for that matter, including China. Well, no, they're not total idiots either. You know, they've got some very good people. It doesn't matter who's around them. Is that they also know that if there are unhappy people in a country where there's instability, and especially as a consequence in the fallout of highly questionable elections, they know that can lead to instability, and instability is not good for anyone. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the region. They couldn't even rig the elections properly.
Welcome, this is Najma Minhas with GVS Dialogue. So today I've invited an expert because so many of us, including myself, have said, why has the United States said something more sternly on Pakistan's elections? Why are Vedant Patel or Matthew Miller, the US spokespersons, dilly-dallying or beating around the bush instead of tackling the question of election rigging head on? Why? So we've said things like, oh, they like dealing with the army, they don't care about people's mandates. But to understand it better, I've invited a former Australian diplomat, Dr. Claude Rickesitz, who's currently a visiting research fellow at the Brussels-based Centre for Security, Defence and Strategy, and who has been looking at Pakistan for the past 40 years to share his insights with me into the recent elections and what response we should expect from Western countries, and how important is respecting the people's mandate for these countries. And really, most importantly, is Shahbaz getting that call from President Biden?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said that the State Department hopes that the Pakistani courts will take a close look at this matter. You've also heard from a lot of members of Congress who have said there should be an independent investigation of the fraud.
Internet platforms to be available to people in Pakistan and around the world. I don't have anything.
We share concerns. Some of the reports that we've heard coming out of Pakistan in terms of intimidation, voter suppression, that kind of thing.
Political spectrum, the need to respect the will of the Pakistani people and ensure a transparent election process is critical, and it is obviously important.
The election process in Pakistan is an internal sovereign affair of Pakistan. Any steps that Pakistan takes in this regard is in conformity with our own constitutional obligations, and not because there is some advice coming from.
Dr. Claude Rickesitz, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'd like to say that, first of all, before we jump into the elections and how the West perceives them or should perceive them going forward, I'd like to ask a little bit, because I was very intrigued. You say that you've spent 40 years working on the region. What got you interested in this region?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. Well, 40 years ago, I was doing my master's in Ottawa in 1980. So even more than 40 years ago. And I decided I was taking a course on political development in third world countries. And there was a course there, and they said, you know, why don't you pick a country? It was a master's program for 1 year. Pick a country, and you use that country each time for each one of the courses for that master's program.
Okay.
And I knew nothing about Pakistan. I decided I picked Pakistan because I was interested in a Muslim country. Having lived in the Middle East when I was a teenager and a kid, I was interested in ethnicity, and I was also interested in the military. And Pakistan pretty much fit the bill. And
Has lots
And
of
then,
ethnicities, has a strong military. What else can you ask for?
yeah,
The fact that we were
and religion in the mix. Yeah,
and the religion, yeah, so very interesting. And the fact that we were in the middle of the Soviet jihad war, did
yeah,
that play any
exactly.
role in this as well?
Not at that point, not at that point at
Okay.
all. The thing that I thought I liked about Pakistan, I knew nothing about Pakistan at all. But so I didn't go there with any, I was either pro Punjabi or pro Sindhi or pro military. I just went there just as a subject matter, and I was interested in it, and then I got to learn so much about it during my master. I decided I've got to do a PhD, and now we're here now
So
talking
you
about it.
went to Pakistan as well?
Yeah. So what happened after I don't want to talk about me on this whole program, but after that I went to Australia, and
Okay.
then it's a long story. But then when I was doing my PhD at the University of Queensland, I did my fieldwork for 6 months, and that was 1982 to 1983. So at the height
Okay.
of Zia, and it was for 6 months. I traveled all over the country. I
Right.
could do it in those days. I wouldn't be able to do it today. It was just
Okay.
fascinating.
Yeah.
I never felt threatened. And then went to India and Bangladesh as well. So.
Okay, very interesting. The fact that you went to India and Bangladesh as well, and you've been covering this region now for almost 40 years. I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of how the country has progressed when you look at Pakistan 40 years on and what it's been through?
Well, I'll be frank. I love Pakistan, but it's not doing well at all. It's, I'm not saying anything that no one else knows. No state secrets here. No, it's just basically it comes down. It's not only Pakistan. It's a bad governance. And when you have bad governance, you have bad government, you have then bad policies.
Right.
So that really simply does not help. It doesn't matter where you do that. So that's an issue. And that's all compounded with too much role of the military. We can talk about that later. Too much role of the military, too much corruption, not enough money put into things that count to develop a country, as in, was it medicine or social welfare, helping, the poorest of the poor. And with that, it just becomes cyclical and just compounds. And that's why we are where we are now.
So you've seen several elections during this 40 years. I mean, what are your thoughts when you look at these elections in the context of earlier elections?
Yeah. Now, most of the elections have been played around with, but this one is very bad. It's particularly bad because we are now very much in a social media era.
Right.
And everyone knows it's been rigged. It was rigged. I shouldn't use the word rigged to start with. It was already, the finger was already put on, on the balance against the PTI, okay, by locking, Imrankhan and all that, and taking away the cricket bat and that sort of stuff, just making it more and more difficult. So already that was a partial rigging. But then on the very day, with the numbers, I don't have to go over that, we know that the numbers changed, that everything was turned off. All of a sudden the loser was the winner, and then we wait for so long to finally get the results. And then on top of that, it's confirmed by the Electoral Commission, Rawalpindi.
Right.
But hey, let's not get that in the way, and they just proceed. And the reason the rigging of this election is so much worse, apart from the economic problems that's going to compound it, is that in this era of social media, the establishment, whoever runs the show, I don't think will be able to get away with it as they used to, because now, and this is why they've had to shut down X, formerly known as, becomes a title, X, formerly known as Twitter.
I think we should stop that, formerly known by this stage. Everybody knows it was Twitter.
X, exactly. Okay, so it's so important. This is why social media is so important, and X and all the other social platforms. That's why they shut it down, because they know people talk to each other.
Right.
And this is not 1977. It's certainly not 1999. And I think they've bit way more than they can chew.
When you say they won't be able to get away with it, is that because you're referring to the role that social media is playing with it? Because, I mean, who is it that they're not going to get away with it? Because apparently now they put a government in place as well.
Yeah, sure. They can do that. They've obviously completely ignored the people's wishes to just do this, and they're just hoping that everyone's just going to simply go back to their homes and forget about it until 5 years from now or whatever. No, I think they won't be able to get away with it because social media, but also I think this is where the crunch is going to come, is that so now we've got this government, the usual suspects going to run the show. It's as if nothing happened. Quite incredible. But they're going to have to take some very, very tough decisions, economic decisions. Okay. And tough decisions, even if Imran Khan had won and been allowed to win and be pumped, he too would have had to take tough decisions. But it's one thing for the population to accept tough decisions when they see that their prime minister, they voted for him, he's legitimate, he knows what he's talking about, we will swallow the difficult pill. But when it's by someone they know wasn't elected properly and that he's not legitimate, people will not buy that, will not accept that. Now, I think I suspect there'll be a lot of riots probably in the streets because of this, especially when the tough measures are going to come through, because IMF will demand this, as does IMF. And so I think, I personally, I don't know if the people of Pakistan are going to continue taking this. That's just, I may be wrong, but I think we've come this election, and also the appearance of Imran Khan over the last few years has changed things, the dynamics. And I think if one last word is, I think people are tired of the same suspects, the same dynasties, the Sharifs and the Bhuttos simply running the show with the military.
You say that people are tired, but tell me this: as a former diplomat, so you were a diplomat in the Australian service.
Yeah.
When you also refer to the fact they can't get away with it, but as a former diplomat, one of the essential things is how the West is going to perceive this this government and this process. Do you think they can get away with it in terms of the West, how they will perceive it? Will the West go ahead and accept these elections? Because after all, Pakistan is a geopolitical strategy for them, right? So as part of that geopolitical strategy, wouldn't they rather have a weak government who they can actually dictate their terms to? I mean, how do you feel as a former public diplomat?
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about that. I don't think foreign governments, whether it's Australian or Australia, can't do anything. They'll just simply have to accept it. That's the way it is. You know? Even though everyone knows that it's not legitimate, but that's the way it is. I mean, one has to be, live in the real world. Now, you're right. I mean, talking about the Americans and all that, for example, sure, they would prefer a weak government that maybe they can push around or whatever. Look, but at the end of the day, it's the people in the countries that actually determine what happens. Notwithstanding, they say, oh, it's the Americans who pushed Imran Khan. Well, probably the Americans probably are let's be frank, probably very happy not to see Imran Khan there anymore.
Right.
Okay. But that's the way it is. Okay. Now, are they going to prefer this mob? Biden, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if Biden's going to make that call, incidentally, to the prime minister. Imran was still waiting for that one. But who cares about that call? But the fact is, governments are made by the people, more or less. Okay. And governments have to work with the government of the day. And there are a lot of good ones and a lot of bad ones, and just have to work with them. And yeah, I mean, but no, the governments, unless there's direct involvement, the other governments are simply going to have to accept it.
So you say, who cares about what the Western countries thinks about, for example? But the reality is, for a country like Pakistan, it's essential what the Western countries think about it. Because, for example, small example, but huge player, IMF. I mean, the IMF is driven by American policy. The Americans have the highest vote in deciding where IMF is going to invest its money. And Pakistan is desperate for the money, right? So it does matter to Pakistan what the United States thinks about it and whether the United States decides to give it a call or not.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, of course, IMF is, the Americans have got a big, obviously a big chunk of votes in the IMF, and they can decide. But that's diminished in relative terms. But you're right, it still has a big role. But the last thing any country, including the United States, whom most Pakistanis think, the Americans really hate them, and one would have to be careful about saying that, because the last thing the Americans would want to see, or anyone else for that matter, including China or India or anyone else, is a collapse of Pakistan. That's the last thing anyone would want. Absolutely. And so even though there may be a lot of anti-Americanism in Pakistan, I don't think they would want that Pakistan to collapse. Now, there's always things, there's always quid pro quo and things like that. But at the end of the day, of course, the West cares a lot about Pakistan in that it's the fifth largest country in a geostrategic critical area of the world. It's it's very important. But they also
the
know
democracy part of that importance. Does it really matter to the Americans if Pakistan is a democratic
I don't.
country?
No. Let's be frank. I don't. I'm not sure how many people are going to watch this, but I don't think that democracy is the key. What they want is stability. But they also know they're not total idiots either. They've got some very good people. It doesn't matter who's around them, around the president. Is that they also know that if there are unhappy people in a country where there's instability, and especially as a consequence in the fallout of highly questionable elections, they know that can lead to instability, and instability is not good for anyone. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the region. It's not good. Terrorism thrives then, and the last thing they want to see is more terrorism in your country. It's again creeping up, as we know, and so that's all bad news. So on the whole, I think the military in Pakistan has done absolutely the wrong thing by not allowing to have free and fair elections. And I think they're going to come to regret it because of all the things I've mentioned, because it can't contain that.
You talk about stability and how any country that's dealing with Pakistan also wants stability. There's a very interesting article today from the New York Times where they refer to how the elections have shattered the image of Pakistan's mightiest force. Now, that's interesting because we all know who Pakistan's mightiest force is. It's the army. And as you refer to as well, the army has made a huge disaster getting involved in these particular elections. Does that then mean that the Americans may be a little bit cautious when working with Pakistan because they understand that A, the image of the military has been tarnished, and B, that there will be instability after this, and maybe we should cautiously welcome any new government? I mean, do you think that's going to figure? Because Matthew Miller talked about an investigation happening onto these allegations of fraud. What are they expecting? What kind of allegation?
Well, okay, lots of things. Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I'm not sure who's going to be doing this investigation. I think there should be an investigation. Well, who's going to be doing it?
Right.
All right. So that's as a starter. Okay. But back to the military, because as we know, military is everything. Is pretty much almost everything in Pakistan, and so I think it has its image or its power, certainly as perceived by the people of Pakistan and probably from outside, has been chipped away at. They couldn't even rig the elections properly. That's big. So their man didn't even get up. Sure, they've got Shahbaz instead of Nawaz, but it's the same family and they'll be able to manipulate them. And Nawaz will still be running the show. As he did the previous time. I mean, little brother goes to him and does this thing and asks him before any big decisions. But I think that doesn't mean that the military has been diminished in Pakistan or is not going to have a big role anymore. But I think maybe the Americans and Biden administration, whoever follows him, will have to realize maybe it's not all in their hands. It's not, they're not capable of completely controlling it. And maybe we should be listening a bit more to other non-military. But that's being maybe wishful thinking. But if there's instability later on down the road, when they have to take the tough economic decisions, maybe they'll have to realize maybe we should be listening to other bits of society, civil society, and opposition, and that sort of stuff.
You talk about the role of the military. you referred to the lack of governance earlier, which was one of the major reasons why Pakistan hasn't progressed in the past 40 years compared to, let's say, Bangladesh or India for sure, right? But even Bangladesh, do you think that the military role has been very negative for Pakistan? Because many people bring up, I'm sure you've heard this as well, Ayub Khan, Zia, Musharraf, all these periods in which economic growth was booming and Pakistan was going places. And, this is used to justify the fact that, we've done well under military role. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the army and the role in governance?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, there was, there are two types of stabilities, when you're governing. There's your positive stability and the negative stability. I mean, the negative is when you really, okay, we have stability, but we're going to have to crack a few heads as we do it. That is not very good. That is not true stability. It's a fragile stability, and it can always, explode at any minute. And this positive stability where actually people have more of a say. It's based on, people's, desires based on elections and that sort of stuff. Now, having said that, there was stability under most of those four dictators from military uniformed guys. There was, economic growth. There was indeed. I wouldn't say that under Zia things were that great. Sure, there was aid, there was economic stability, more or less, but it was highly repressive. And, there was always expectation that things would explode. But, each time, especially the last two dictators, they were very lucky because basically their hide was saved by Afghanistan and what was happening next door each time. And so they were a useful tool, player, call it whatever you want, by the Americans and other Western nations to prop up, to assist, and to turn a blind eye on. Because they were useful and still today, of course, even though the Americans have left Afghanistan, Pakistan, if you read my last piece, Pakistan remains a very important window on what's happening in Afghanistan. How much Pakistan has influence in Afghanistan? I would say not much. Just look what's happening with the TTP and all that. But still, Pakistan cannot be ignored. And of course, Americans are, putting a lot of their eggs, strategic eggs, in that basket with India. But they still can't. They know they can't ignore Pakistan because the size, location, maybe a bit of the history, and also because they'll have to see a collapse of Pakistan.
What do you think if Trump comes into power? What will be the relationship between Pakistan and Trump?
Yeah, well, that's a question everyone asks about their own relationship with a Trump presidency. That's a very difficult one. They seem to get along in the White House when Imrankhan went to visit Trump. I don't know. I think the way I'm just thinking out loud now. I think. With a Trump administration, Trump is very much a transactional sort of chap. He'll like whoever's there if he can do good deals with Americans. I think that's the way I see it. I don't think Trump really knows, cares, as long as it's not a problem and he can do things for the United States. That's the way I see it. But again, Trump hasn't been elected yet, so I don't know. It's difficult to tell. The things don't forget. I mean, so just add on to that. Relationships or governments are important, but the relationships with a country, they don't just start and end. There's a whole life behind it, and relationship that, especially with the United States, goes back many, many years. And whether Trump comes or Biden stays or whatever, the relationship is now going to change dramatically. I wrote another piece about that. Whoever comes now with this new administration in Islamabad, I don't think the relationship with other countries, whether Afghanistan, the United States, China, India, the usual suspects, is going to change that much. I don't see it. Absolutely not. I do think that maybe things will get a bit better with India, because I know Nawazsharif was very keen, but he'll be very careful because he tried that last time and that didn't go so well with the military.
Interesting. And then how do you see these elections as an inflection point? I mean, Pakistan now has almost two paths in front of it. Which path do you think it's going to take?
Well, I think I think it's going to go. Personally, I think they can't continue as in the military with then the usual dynasties running the show without allowing the people to have a real say. I don't think so, and especially with the very difficult economic circumstances they're sitting in now. And I think if they start really repressing the people when they're gonna have to take economic decisions, tough ones, because that's what the IMF will decide that demand. I think they may have a real problem in their hands. You look at Sri Lanka, what happened there? That's a small country, and there was a change, complete change. So now they may decide that it's too much, and they may have to take Imran Khan out of jail and do something with him, and maybe a government national unity. I don't know. I'm just looking ahead, but I don't think that this sort of continuation, this sort of governance can continue. Now, the problem with, and I'm looking at basically some almost revolutionary condition. Revolutionary conditions, just you take the Arab Street, for example, Arab Spring, it all turned very badly wrong at the end.
Right.
So, but easy transitions are are much more difficult, but easier to manage, but they often don't happen that often. And but I don't know if things can continue the way they have for so many years. I think people are tired of it.
Dr. Cloud, thank you so much for giving me time today.
My pleasure. Great talking to you.